everyone. This is Savannah Rose Johnson here with Eclipse Evolution Podcast. I'm super excited to connect with you all today, and even more so excited to introduce you to my dear friend Jason Sandmann of Out of the Weeds Coaching. Jason and I have been friends for a few years now and fellow coaches in the field, and I'm just really pumped to have him here as my first guest and to explore his adventures and his new book that he's releasing. So, Jason, if you would please just introduce yourself and tell the good people who you are.
This is always the hardest part of any of these kind of interviews. Yes. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. And uh, for those of you who are graced with Savannah's friendship and presence, she is an amazing person in my life. I'm so thankful to be here on her podcast. So yes, as you said, my name is Jason Sandmann, and I have become pretty much obsessed with our emotional healing and what helps move people from a life of suffering to one of peace and joy. I spent many years of my life attached to the identity of being depressed. I was very much, while I never considered myself an alcoholic, I was very much, using a lot of substances to avoid my feelings and avoid dealing with my life as I saw it. So, over the last few years, as I have continued to kind of like transform my story, I've been really just called to help as many people as I can do that with them as well. Like, really help people understand why happiness is a little easier and not as complex as we tend to make it a lot of times, and just kind of help people come to a little bit better understanding of themselves, which I believe becomes a very spiritual and freeing journey as we go.
Wow. Jason, I think just one of my favorite things about you and something that I just appreciate so much just in our connections is that you're so open with your own story and you're so freely vulnerable. And I just feel like that's really refreshing. One, just like from a male's perspective or side of things, I guess. And then just two, I feel like that's something that just builds trust, especially in whether it's a coaching relationship or even just like our friendship is we can just tell it like it is and be so real and raw. And that's something that I really cherish. And I know it takes a lot of courage to be that way. That's a process in and of itself. So I just wanted to start out by just thanking you for being you. So yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been not always easy to get to this place, right? Like, it's very, um, I'm sure we'll probably talk about this as we go through the interview, but when your self-image is so tied up in how you think other people see you, it becomes this really kind of toxic circle that it's really hard to break out of. And if I can share my story to help people have a better understanding of their own struggles, I am happy to do it, because it's been something where it's been everything that has been my biggest challenges has turned into my greatest gifts. And I love that you brought up the fact that we need more men doing this, because I do think that there are so many misapplications of what it means to be masculine or what it means to be a man that are out there, and we do need more people who are willing to step up and just own who they are and share their experience, because that gives other people permission to step into theirs.
Yes. Absolutely. That's so funny you said like gives people permission. I was just marinating on that very thought today when it comes down to just the concept of permission. And I feel like kind of true self-empowerment is when we move from other people giving us permission to be a version of us to like truly being empowered and free, like you were saying, is when we give ourselves permission to show up how we want to. And as embracing the yin and the yang, the light and the dark, and it's not good or bad, but it's just our full essence and how all of that deserves to be seen, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on really one of just the keys of life, right? Like, is we almost everyone is driven by two major fears, right? It's fear of abandonment and fear of rejection. Those are the two that really kind of drive most of our behavior, along with love on the other end of the spectrum. And The thing that we don't understand is that in our fear of rejection, we reject ourselves. And in our fear of abandonment, we abandon ourselves, right? Like we're always looking outside of us when the work is inside. The work is to really come to love all aspects of ourselves. And it doesn't mean we don't have areas that we want to change or improve upon, but we accept them all as just a part of the whole, rather than, waiting for somebody else to tell us that it's okay to be the way that we are. Like we have to really do the work to come to love who we are, and then come to direct and choose it. Because once we do that, we can literally change the course of our life in an instant.
Mm, yes. Well said. You just always fill up my cup whenever you speak, Jason, just because I feel so, just, you have so much soul, like there's so much richness in what you say. I just have always appreciated how intentional you are with like what you share and how you share it. And so again, just thank you for just being you. And I know you touched upon in your new book, which is The Overthinker's Guide to Gratitude. It's one, first of all, folks, it's a fantastic book. And I love how it's interactive. And that's something that I think really allows a relationship to be built with readers, is when not only like you're telling them and sharing this beautiful narrative with them, and informing them of all these different things, but also giving them that chance to put their own stamp on it and apply their own life to it. I feel like that's like a true collaboration, that you invite into your new book. So I love that about it, first of all. But where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So I think you mentioned a fear in that, kind of in the earlier stages of it. Would you share a little bit about how fear has contributed to this aspect of overthinking? I guess I'm kind of wondering a little bit about why maybe you named your book what you did, and what it means to be an overthinker, and does fear have a part in that identity piece?
Absolutely, it does. And I'm so grateful that you've asked this question. Also, I just want to receive all the blessings of the kindness that you just gave to me, because I obviously feel the same way about you, but I just want to acknowledge that that was received and valued. So thank you. Yeah, like, when I think of fear and the attachment to it and how that relates to overthinking, what really first comes up in that conversation is our attachment to our ego and our sense of self, right? And that like we are separate from each other, we are separate from the things that we want. Like there's all this I kind of thing, right? And like when it comes to reading a book, one of the reasons I was so determined to speak out and to being like, hey, this is my process, this has been really useful, but like you do have permission to kind of change it and make it your own, is because most of the time when we read something, we're reading to try to understand it in our head, right? And this has been, for most of my life, this has been my sword and my shield. This is where I did have like all of my like positive attachments to my self-worth was in how intelligent I felt I was and how I could think through everything. It was also probably the biggest challenge that I had, because like it was, if somebody threatened that idea, or if I couldn't immediately like just get something, then it just wasn't something that I put a lot of effort into. And so where I'm at in my own personal life with just kind of moving through fear is recognizing how often it still likes to show up and drive the bus. And that usually shows up because I'm here trying to figure it out and just being like, okay, what did I do wrong? Or like, what's this process that I have to learn so I can kind of move forward? Very rarely in past parts of it did I move to the embodiment stage and actually kind of living a lot of the ideas in practice. It was just like, oh, okay, I get that. That makes sense. And then moving on to the next thing. And there is value in that, right? We want to bring our mind and our body in line. But I was in a coaching course last year, like where I was kind of being a student. And the main leader of the program, just every time he would tell me, he's like, you're overthinking, you're overthinking, you're overthinking. And I was just like, I don't know any other way to be. I really don't know how not to overthink. Like even when I practice meditation and presence and like separating from the thoughts, like my normal go-to is overthinking. And what I'm really starting to learn now is when I'm really caught in that overthinking and everything's me trying to figure it out, the best thing I can do for myself is connect to my breath, connect to my body, and then ask myself, like, what's true in the present moment, and like where I need to focus my attention in the present moment. And since doing that, it's really allowed me to shift to a much more comfortable and confident place to where I still get to access the thinking part of my brain when I want to, um, find some more knowledge or like try to think through a problem. But I'm no longer letting the programming of past thoughts or other people's thoughts or whatever else drive the bus of like what, somebody's going to think or what society says we need to do. It's like, no, I get to actually drop into my heart space for a little bit and figure out what's true for me, and then allow those thoughts to come to empower that rather than latching on to every single thought that we have and thinking that that's the only solution, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes. I feel so called out, but like in a good way. I love just how you're such a straight shooter when you talk about this stuff. And I think I really connect to that story or just like your story and your experience, because overthinking may or may not be my middle name. So I really appreciate just how you've mentioned just that body connection, like that dropping into the heart space, because it is like it can feel like an actual dropping, like all this activity, this buzzing. Like my Reiki mind is like all the overflow of energy up here, and actually just drawing that into our body and grounding ourselves. I love that visual aspect, and I know for me, I'm so prone to like emotional reasoning, like and I feel like that's a huge factor of the overthinking style maybe that I have, where it's like if I'm thinking something like an anxious thought or an insecurity or whatever it is, and how that brings up this big feeling in me. And just because I have that big feeling, it almost supports or validates that thought that I'm having. And then I get stuck in that cycle of like, well, this must be true. And I must have to figure out a solution, whatever, instead of just, like you said, moving more into my body and kind of having access to that logical part or I guess thinking part, but not allowing it to like dominate everything as well. So just thank you for your insights on that, because that's something I think could be helpful for our viewers and listeners, but it's also something that I feel like I need to um, adopt more myself. So yeah, that's super valuable.
Well, yeah, we're always in the practice of that, right? And this brings up another kind of concept that the book is built around, which is that this idea that in almost everything we're working backwards, right? Like, so, there's this concept, and I know you're familiar with it, and I imagine many of your audience will be, like, you are not your thoughts, right? Like, we are not our thoughts. Like, so many of our thoughts are not actually our own, but they are society programming or indoctrination that we all go through, etc. But the truth of the matter is your life will reflect what you do repeatedly think and give power to, right? And most people end up working backwards when it comes to that, especially when the emotions come into play. And, when we have a thought or whatever, and it brings this emotion that we would call negative, it's so easy to be like, oh my gosh, like you do feed into that loop. And it's like, why do I feel so bad? And then you just can't keep on feeding the thought process. But if we start thinking of like our emotions, like from positive, negative, not actually looking at it from, good or bad, but like positive is just expansive, abundant, where negative is constricting and restricting. And if our emotions are never actually telling us anything to do, but they're just a self-reflection, then it's just allowing us to be like, oh, I just had a thought that, okay, I don't feel good about this. Like something's not in line with where I am being called or where I'm being led. And that allows you to have a much more kind of open conversation with yourself and be like, oh, okay, this thought like is pointing me that I don't want to necessarily go in this direction. And instead of like, attaching to the thought. And I talk about all the time, like when I work with people, whether it's like one-on-one or groups or whatever else, I try to remove people from this, whatever, when we're talking about our feelings, I am upset or I am anxious, telling our brain that is giving it programming to say, hey, you know what, this is who I am and this is what I do. And the brain just accepts it all as instructions. And so just moving it to like I am feeling, right? Like I am feeling anxious, it creates a little bit of space and just allows you to not like be tied up in like, well, I am anxious, an anxious person. It's just like, no, I'm feeling this way. And then eventually, with enough practice with meditation and other presence practices, you can be like, I am choosing to feel, right? Like, and it's just like, oh, I can make a new choice. And that doesn't mean that you're never going to experience those emotions that are restrictive, right? Like you are going to always have some times where you feel sad or where you feel angry or where you feel violated. But that's part of the human experience. But once we start like understanding that, but to stay in that emotion is a choice, there becomes so much more space to then go and actively create the I am affirmations that we want our brain to receive, right? Like the I am joyful, I am grateful, I am happy. Once we really get into the practice and habit of just habituating that, then our brain receives that as instructions. And over time, that creates a completely different worldview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so powerful. I mean, it's just so interesting to hear your perspective on attachment, and I love how you share upon attachment in just a lot of different ways, because I think that's something that your book really, and just what you're saying right now, it kind of challenges me to see attachment in different ways, like especially like I feel like when you move from like that I am upset to like I am feeling upset, for me especially, that it gives it like a health, well, detachment one, but also I feel like you're right, it really allows me to move more into, I don't know, just a different perspective on identity, because I think just me being who I am, of a very big feelings person, and that's something that those big feelings were sometimes just too heavy for me to even handle, I think, because of the attachment that I carried with them. But now I can really see the value even more just in listening to you, like how that detachment can happen just through the tiny changes, like the tiny adjustment in that language, but it has such a huge ripple effect. And that's something I always appreciate about speaking with you, is like you get me thinking about things. I feel like you challenge paradigms in a lot of ways, especially kind of what you said a second ago of like a lot of our thoughts just like aren't even ours. In my mind, I'm like, dang, you're kind of right. Like a lot of the source of stuff that's aggravating me at this moment in time is, I feel like a lot of that societal programming that I'm having to shed and work through. And sometimes it can kind of leave, when we shed that, we're kind of left being like, so who am I now that I don't attach to these things? It's interesting.
Yeah, that to me, that's the work, right? And it can be really scary. It can be really, really, it's like, oh my gosh, who am I without like these thoughts and ideas and everything else that I have? And that's why so many people don't feel comfortable in approaching their healing, right? Like you think that, to let go of all of these ideas, you have to let go of the people that are in your life. You have to let go of what your parents may have told you, and it feels like it's some kind of um, hurtful act or some act of distrust. But the truth of the matter is the more that we can kind of step into that and really come to let go of everything that's not ours, like then the people who do kind of come along for the ride for that and choose us, like the universe only puts people in your path, like when you're ready for them and when they're ready for you to learn from. And so like you end up getting so much more beauty from it, but it's a very, very challenging thing at first to come across. And a lot of people will be triggered just by the idea of like that they might have been indoctrinated, right? But the truth is we all are, like until we're 9 years old, we're just sponges for information. That's how our paradigms get set. And we've always heard of, and we're certainly not going to go into any sort of political discussion here, but like if you think about other countries, we've always heard about like North Korea has like they're so indoctrinated, and they are, like they're very controlled with the media they get to consume. But like what 5 or 6 year old understands what they are doing by pledging their allegiance to the flag? It's just another form of it. And there's no attachment of good or bad to it, right? Like that's an entire different discussion about good or bad being a human construct. But it is just a fact of life. So the more that we can kind of just drop out of, um, or just question where our beliefs come from. It's like, is this something that I actually like know and believe and understand and have seen, or is this just something that I've accepted because it's the way that it's always been, and I haven't known that I actually get to challenge my thinking a little bit there.
Yes. Yeah. And that's so powerful too, especially, gosh, you said something that just really struck me. Just when it comes down to like the fact that we're sponges and all this stuff is just so normalized and we don't even think about questioning what we're thinking. I mean, that's like a whole that's like kind of like some inception stuff right there where it really can be, like you said, super scary because then it's like, well, shoot, like now what? And you're so right. I feel like there is so much courage that is like required when it comes down to that healing process and starting to question things. And how I feel like to maybe, I don't know if this is the right way to say this, but I feel like a lot of times the amount of courage that we have, sometimes there's a parallel to our self-worth that we have too, because I feel like to really start to question our thinking and start to have the courage to go on this healing path, we have to in some ways almost like bulldoze our sense of self-worth and rebuild that as well in the process. Because like you said, I wrote it down where you're talking about you said like sword and shield a second ago with like the overthinking, how that was like a protective thing. And that hits me so good because that's something I'm working through right now. It like is like my armor, so to speak, when it comes down to like the armor that I show the world, or the armor that I like through fear have to put on because of something there. And it's like that can take so much courage to put down that armor and really like see ourselves and kind of redesign what our self-worth is built upon, not like on the armor, but like on our authenticity in some ways.
Yeah. And I I always love talking with you, and I'm always so encouraged by somebody who is so willing to jump into this stuff so much earlier than I did, right? Like, um, but yeah, like we have this self concept that's not even our own, and we take that from how we think that the world views us. But like every person that we meet, like they don't ever see us for us, right? They see us through the filter of their own experience, and so not only are we basing our self perception on what somebody else thinks, but we're basing it on our perception of what somebody else thinks when we can't even know, right? And it is inception. Like it's this never ending thing. And courage is not like the absence of fear, right? Like we tend to look at what society puts forth as courageous, and like that becomes another referendum. It's like, I don't have that kind of feeling or whatever else. It's like, no, you're courageous every time that you come and you oppose something that makes you afraid, so you can go ahead and like step out into something. And that's why that phrase of get comfortable in discomfort is so true, is because like the more that we can like start practicing just being, it's like, okay, I'm not really ready for this, but we shut off the fear center in the brain for a little bit and be like, no, I want to do this anyway. And to remember that the brain is not doing that as a way of trying to be our enemy. It's not something like so many people will get caught up and just be like, oh man, like I'm just so frustrated with that. Like the brain is always just trying to protect us all the time. But its method of doing that, at least in the lizard brain part of it, is outdated because we no longer live in a moment where we have to fear bears and like, I don't know why bears is the only thing that came to my head right now, but we're going to roll with it. We don't have to fear bears.
Yes.
Right. But, like, it's just doing its job, right? Like the brain only wants to seek confirmation of what it knows. So all of these things that like keep us miserable and that we stay in the same pattern, like the brain's only doing that because it knows what comes next. Like that's safe for it. So we have to actually just try to be like, hey, thank you. I appreciate you trying to keep me safe, but we're going to go ahead and try something different now. Like that's when detaching from the program and starting to get, it's like, oh, I have a higher perspective and I get to be in charge of what I actually do and think and observe about the world. And that is a constant practice that in my experience, I don't know if it ever really goes away. Like certainly more and more I try to drop into like deeper meditation and trying to like really connect with spirit. But that's still very much a work in progress. Like for me, stepping into, as you and I know from talking, like stepping fully into my business and my role and my dreams and what I think I'm here to do is exercise and facing fear and practicing courage every day. And there are some days where it becomes really easy and fun, and there are some days where like the old like self shame monster wants to come back and be like, "What do you think you're doing?" Or like take 1 5 minute break to like play a game or watch something on YouTube, and it's like, "See, you always do this, right?" Like it's just really starting to listen and understand that courage just comes from. I know I went a little bit of a long way around this, but like courage just comes from being willing to kind of oppose the pattern and then knowing that you're still safe. We're just showing ourselves that, oh no, I can do what I'm uncomfortable with and I'm fine. And then that becomes habit, and then that becomes our reality. And then we push ourselves a little bit more and we push ourselves a little bit more. And do that enough times and your life will just transform. It'll go from something where you feel like you're a victim of your life to being the creator of it.
Yes, that's so well said. And yeah, I really appreciate just your perspective on courage and even just like those defenses, like whether it's shame, which shame is something that I've recently, probably in the last year, have learned is a protective thing, which for me, like, and even like self-sabotage or self-harm, it's like it took me a little while to understand like how is that protective, but it kind of in exploring it more, it's our way of regaining control over something. Is like if we're the problem and if we fall into that shame spiral, it might feel like crap and a half, but we're in control of that rather than us having to have some surrender to the process, which sometimes that's like can be the scariest thing, is the not knowing aspect. Kind of what you were saying a second ago, how we're really hardwired in a lot of ways to fear the unknown, but there's kind of this concept of like the second naivete that I'm really trying to embrace with that, where it's like I kind of see like my dog as an example of this, but also like little kids I think can be a beautiful example of our default setting, what it really can be of just being excited even if we don't know what something is. Because I know with my dog, if I say anything in this happy tone, he's gonna be like game, like so game for anything. Even if it's like we're gonna go to the vet, he might not realize until we're actually there that like he's been deceived. But that being said, if I'm like, you want to go for a ride or you want to go to here, he's like, yeah, I do, just because he isn't afraid. And he, of course, doesn't know. Like, just like with little kids, if you say something very similar along those lines in that excited tone, they have no idea sometimes, but they're just pumped. They haven't learned, like, keyword learn, like to be afraid of what they don't know yet. So kind of learning how to put down that fear of uncertainty, because it is something that we learn over time to be painful or jarring or whatever the case may be, and learning to adopt like that second naivete, that kind of positive naivete of just being excited for the process, even if we don't know, kind of like what we were discussing before we started our formal chat today. Like, I don't know what's happening. Like sometimes, but just learning to be excited about it because we know we're gonna be okay. We know we have each other, and like how that can be enough if we allow it to.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of a second naivete, and a couple things come to mind there. One, I love you bringing up like animals to it, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. How in some ways, like we're the most evolved species, right? Like because of our ability to think or do whatever else. But like our ego is really what keeps us furthest from sometimes our truest nature, right? Like a dog never questions its own kind of thing being a dog. Like it just goes and acts based on how it's feeling and its emotions. And really the more that we can kind of get into that, like again, this is a brilliant gift, and we've been able to create so much as a society because of it. But we also feel so separate a lot of times and disconnected from the world around us, and that's all basically just a construct of the mind and our ego. And like, so I've been really practicing. I've been in nature a lot more lately. I've been trying to observe. I'm even one in a spirit of play. I got an animal deck to do like card readings, and I'm like, I've
Yeah.
never done this before. Like, I'm Mr. Practical. Where is this woo woo side coming out? But it has been so informative and so useful and such a cool experience. And so just trying to remember to be, more in tune with that animal. And also that allows for so much more forgiveness too, right? Like, your dog goes and makes a mess on the rug, and you might be angry at it in the moment, but in the end you find forgiveness for it pretty quickly, right? Because it's a dog, it's just doing what a dog does and like what it's been trained to do. But how often do we not give the same forgiveness to humans, including ourselves, for being human, right? Like, everything is like, oh, if they've done something to make me upset or angry or whatever else, it's like, I can't believe it. And it's just like, acceptance a lot of times just becomes like, let me allow you to have made mistakes, because we're all going through on the journey on this rock, trying to figure it out as best we can. And the more I learn to like, or the more I'm in the practice of just really looking at people with that lens, the more I feel like I get closer to my true nature and to my, to what I was designed to do. And that is such a beautiful journey that I invite everybody to really explore a little bit more. And then the other thing is very much there. Like, we think that we're like thinking machines, right? But we're feeling machines. Like, our emotions are our guidance system. And there's nothing that is a bad one. Like, they're all there to teach us something. So shame, while I all the time will, try to work with people on like not letting shame drive the bus, shame is there to protect us, right? Like, it is there just to be like, hey, something's wrong. Like, this isn't you, or this is you. And like, so us learning to really communicate it with it and embrace it as just being like, okay, this is something that is just here to teach me something about myself, but it's not who I am. And I think I put it in the book, but like, I have a phrase that I use all the time that is, should invites shame and could invites possibility, right? Like, when we tell ourselves what we should do, one of my other friends calls it shooting all over yourself. Um,
I
that
love it.
that is like, yeah, she's great. It's so true. But like, whenever we're telling ourselves, oh, man, I should have done this or I should have done that, like, that's just an easy way for us to be right into that victim mindset, or like beating ourselves up or seeing ourselves as less than. As soon as we change that language, and as soon as we tweak the way we say it, it's like, oh, I could have done this differently. Like, how much more freeing and expansive is that? It's like, oh, that was just another option I could have taken. I didn't. It's okay. I can do it the next time, rather than like having all of this mental energy and all of this like emotion tied up to a past decision that has already happened. We can't do anything about it, right? But living in it and like continuing to use it as a means to beat ourselves up or to see the worst in ourselves ends up creating so much of the challenges that we have in our health and in our bodies and in our relationships. And so really inviting ourselves, as you mentioned earlier, like, to just adjust our language. It doesn't take a ton, but like the subtle little tweaks that we use to like speak our world creates such a different experience of the world.
Mm-hmm. So true. I mean, absolutely. That's one of the things I love teaching a lot of my clients as well, is like the power of language, and specifically how like our motivation is so linked to our language, whether it's like, I need to do this or I have to do this. It's like those just suck the fun out of things immediately. And then
Yeah,
we're like already having to deal with resistance and having to conjure up more motivation, rather than like just changing it to like, I want to do this, and allowing, like you said, like our emotions to guide us because we want to do it. We're not having to add like salt to a wound.
right.
Um, and I wanted to ask you as well, I loved your kind of in the latter part of your book, the specific like interactive part, the journaling method, like with your 3-2-1 method. Would you please explain that? Because that's something that I never really thought about it in that way. I feel like it was so simple yet such a great overarching just practice when it comes down to gratitude and beyond. If you would please share about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I first started with gratitude journaling, I struggled with it for a while, and I've now come to see that many people do. But it was just gratitude, and that was it, right? Like I was just trying to find things I was grateful for, and over time, that does really rewrite your brain. And so, gratitude is a wonderful place to start. But for me, as I moved through the practice, I realized there were some other areas where it was still, um, I wasn't necessarily rewriting the program in a way that was all encompassing or holistic. And so I don't even remember where I saw the concept of a 3-2-1 journal before. Like that was something that I'd seen somewhere else, but I kind of made this on my own. It's just like, we like to keep things really simple and easy, right? The more complexity that we add to something, the harder it becomes. But, I wanted to figure out a few different ways that I could add to the gratitude practice, make it easy, and really have a full experience. So, like 3-2-1 stands for, it's three things that I am grateful for, two ways that I make myself proud, because we really have an issue with self love in this country, and I would say, well, in this world, and I would say that really most of our problems in society are rooted in that lack of self love and emotional avoidance. So just writing two things there, and like just building some reason to celebrate ourselves. In a way that doesn't feel like that is just for us, that we don't care about how anybody else is viewing it. And then one unbreakable commitment for the next day. And for me, that's about like self integrity and building that self trust, right? Like it's just like no matter what else is going to happen in our day, this is the one thing that I commit to doing. And the more that we like do that and we track it, then we're just like, oh, I can trust my own word, right?
Mm.
Like I can actually see that there's evidence that if I commit to doing something, I'm going to do that, rather than this just like constant chatter that becomes in almost everybody's head that I have met. It's just like, oh, I never do it as I say I'm going to do, or like, yeah, I always kind of quit in the middle. And I certainly have struggled with that, right? Like as part of that intelligence sword and shield that I dealt with. Like if something didn't come easily for me, I didn't work for it. Like it's like I just didn't have that strength. So for a long time, whenever it came to actually having to work for it, like that was the story I lived by, and it was just like I don't trust myself to do any of the work. So for me, building this one commitment and just being like, no matter what else happens with my day tomorrow, this is what I commit to. And sometimes that is a feeling, like it's just like I'm just going to be joyful and happy, and I'm going to choose gratitude whenever I can. Sometimes it's specific tasks. It's like I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I complete my paper, or write that post that I needed to write, or and the more I've done that, the more like I've just transformed. Like you transform the relationship with yourself by doing these things. Like you become, it's like you're training your brain. It's like, okay, what circumstance can I, like, what, no matter what's happening, like what do I get to be grateful for? And then how am I proud? Like what do I love about myself? What is something that I just am so happy that I did and that I get to own? And then what do I do to build like my trust in my word, so I know that tomorrow I'm going to step in and be the best version of myself. And as I've done that and really habituated that, like it's become such a useful tool in my arsenal of just always being able to come back and not only just look at it going forward, but if I ever need to look back and be like, look at all of this that I've actually done and the things that I really enjoyed, it becomes this thing where I can go back and look at it. And anytime I need to like find a shot in the arm, rather than looking for somebody else to tell me why I am valuable or valid, like I get to look back and go like, oh no, I'm good. I've got this. And it becomes a really beautiful way to build a very healthy relationship with yourself.
Mm. Wow. I love that. Thank you for explaining that more, because I found the last part, like the one unbreakable commitment. I found that kind of curious because it just wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting like one goal, but I see now why you use those words instead of like one goal for the day, because you're right, like it can be such a huge spectrum rather than just like a thing that I'm gonna maybe do, like you said, like write that post or whatever the case may be, or it could just be whatever it is that you're trying to foster in your life,
Yeah.
like whether it's like a new attitude or something of that sort. So I see why you use that now, and I really appreciate that, because you're so right. Like it is a self-love epidemic right now, and I think you really said something valuable where just it's something that our country, our world is just really struggling with. And I see this all the time with my clients, and helping them build confidence, because there's such a, and I don't know where this comes from necessarily, but there's such a shared belief among people that's like confidence has to equal arrogance, where it's like, but that's not what it really is. It's like, I mean, confidence, I love to share with people how, like, when you break that word down, it means like with full loyalty. So, like, self confidence is like with full loyalty to ourselves. And it's just interesting how that's been misconstrued as like arrogance. And I say a lot of times too, like, real confidence doesn't mean you have to stand on other people to feel tall. That's what I feel like arrogance is when you have to put other people down in order to feel good about yourself. Whereas, like, I love what you were saying just now, like especially with the two things, like in celebration of ourselves, or that we're proud of with ourselves. I feel like that's just that organic building ourselves up and watering our own garden, so to speak, rather than waiting for us to be like, water me, please. It's like
Yeah.
we're learning how to do that. I love that concept.
Um, yeah, confidence has been something I struggled with and sometimes still struggle with for the majority of my life. And it really is, there's so much, again, the language that we use around it is crazy. And I also feel, well, before I get into that, I'll continue this thought first. Confidence is really just knowing that no matter the result, you got your own back, right? Like that's what it is. It's just like it's divorcing your emotional state from the outcome, which is
Mm-hmm.
why it is commitment and not goal, right? Like because goals are usually outcome focused, right? Like I'm going to go ahead and achieve this or I'm going to get this done, where like commitment's just the action that we take no matter what the actual result of it is. It's like I commit to taking this one particular step. And that's how you develop confidence, is by just being like, okay, sometimes this worked, this didn't, I learned something, but am I okay? Like, yes, I get to still choose what I make it mean. I get to choose how I feel about it. I get to come back and try it again tomorrow, or I get to say, you know what, this wasn't for me. And the more that we can flex that muscle and just really be like, hey, you know what, no matter at the end of the day, like I'm proud of what I've done and I've put it forward. You're right, like arrogant, like we do conflate it with arrogance, and like especially for people, and I'm going to speak for my experience as a man who's like had to deal with confidence and trying in the dating world and everything else. Like when you don't have it, you feel like you'll never be able to. Like you look at the people who are confident, and you're just like either you create a story, I don't want it because I don't want to be arrogant that way, or they have it naturally, I'll never feel that. And no, we do get to feel that, but it comes from choosing yourself, right? Like and I'll relate one of my personal stories from when I was married. I was married for 11 years. We were together for 13, and that was the least confident time in my life. And I look back on it now and to own my own mistakes in there and the way that I wanted to improve. Like, I kept on asking this person to love me and to tell me that they loved me and to show me and all of these things. And then I would immediately reject her love all the time because I didn't have any frame of self-love, right? Like I didn't trust any of it because like who would love me? Like, it was that kind of thing. And that became like that relationship was there to teach me. It's just like I'll never feel valued. I'll never feel loved or lovable in the way that I want until I start to learn to do that myself and just see it because like it's just part of it. Confidence is the same way, right? Like it's just being able to say, hey, I'm going to try this and I'm just going to live with the results. And once we start really removing our emotional state from our circumstances in that way, then we actually get to start like creating our emotional state, and that gets to be where we build our circumstances from, and it becomes this completely different game. And that's really the fun and beautiful thing about it.
Wow, I'm so moved. You just always know the things to say that get me right in my my feelings. I love it, but it's so, again, it's so vulnerable and so relatable, and just like, thank you for sharing yourself and your heart and the lessons that you've learned, because I think that's such a just important piece as we're on this journey. Is like, you're so right, and I wrote it down. Like, I thought it was so interesting, your choice of words, like the divorcing our emotional state from the outcome, because that's something I certainly am learning from that, because I feel like, I don't know, it's almost like I keep my emotions hostage in a way, where it's like, okay, I can't feel this way until it looks like this. And it's like, why am I robbing myself of that joy? And you made me think of, I was watching this seminar that Matthew McConaughey did a few weeks ago, and it was super cheeky. I loved it, and it was like the art of living. And he had a lot of life coaches who were speakers on that. But something he said was like, if you're, feeling stuck, to kind of go back to and like remember your accomplishments, because that's going to help, one, just charge your batteries, like jive you up, but then also it helps you know where to go from there, because you are really remembering who you are, and not just like the things that you've done. Because those, yeah, we can do wonderful things, we can do terrible things, but how it's like we're more than just that outcome, how it's so much more like about where we operate from. And I feel really aligned with what you're saying, and how, like, when we operate from that place of self-love, that's what we, one, reflect in our interactions with other people. And kind of what you said at the very, very beginning, of like that rejection that we fear, we reject ourselves in that process. Or on the other hand, if we are fearing abandonment, then we have that potential to be abandoning ourselves. So I feel like that's really connected, in this understanding and almost like dissection of like what true confidence is, and like where it comes from. So that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I didn't end up participating in that Matthew McConaughey thing, but I did look at it, and I love how he approaches life in a lot of ways, because he does clearly get a lot of this stuff, and has built a really amazing human experience while he's done that. And it reminds me of the book "The Body Keeps the Score," right?
Mm.
Like, if we look at that book, and like, no matter if we're like thinking about like the past or the future, our body experience is all in the present. So like with PTSD, right? Like, that's when they've got that trauma stored in their body. And if they go back and relive that, like, it's their body feeling it again in the present moment. Well, that also happens with our future state too, right? Like, if we go back and we remember those really beautiful moments where we felt energized and where we really felt connected, and then we start like picturing like, our future state and attaching those same emotions to it, like the body and the brain, like they come together. Like, that's what manifestation really is. When we're talking about it, is just, and again, there goes the woo again. Like, for those of y'all who don't know me, like 3 years ago, if you would have told me that I'd be like heavily in like law of attraction and woo stuff, I would not have guessed that this was going on. But here we are. I'm embracing it. I love the path. It's fantastic. But it really is true. Like, our body can only feel it. So the more that we can go through, and that's why hypnosis is so powerful, right? Like, just going and saying, like, just conditioning our body to expect success and to practice joy and to practice gratitude. Over time, that just becomes like what it habituates. And again, it doesn't mean that we're not going to face those emotions where it's like, I touched the hot fire, I don't want to do that again. But but that's nothing to fear. Like, it's that it's never the emotion that's causing our suffering, right? It's the resistance to how we're feeling that's causing our suffering. It's, I don't want to feel this way, and then so we numb, or we hide, or we run away. We seek something outside of ourselves. As soon as we allow ourselves to accept the feeling and be like, why am I feeling this way? Is there a story that I need to change? We begin that self-reflection process, like literally, like that's when we get to let it go and it dissipates. Like we're supposed to feel it. It's the not feeling it that causes the energy blockages and the backup and everything else. So the more that we can, yeah, just get into that, if you're at a down moment and you need to like psych yourself up before presentation, before podcast, before, asking that girl out on that date or whatever, practice remembering like sometime when you felt really good about yourself and just notice how like your body starts to feel. It's crazy. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I always tell people like kind of what you're saying, our brain, it just, the instructions we give it, and I say, like, I use the word like blueprint, but I'm saying tomato, right? But it is very much like what we imagine. Our brain is kind of like, okay, this is my game plan, this is what you want for me. So if we're like worst case scenarioing it, I don't know, I just made that into a verb, but if we're worst case scenario it, then that's what our brain is going to be like, getting us ready for, our sword and our shield. But on the other hand, if we're like imagining everything going well, of course, being realistic in our expectations and not attaching to the expectations or the outcome, but envisioning what we can do in that moment and allowing that to become, like you said, like conditioning ourselves to that happiness and that success and that whatever it might be. That's so important. And I think you're right. Like that is such a key to like the cultivation of our reality, like life not just happening to us, but it coming from us, and how we do have a hand in painting that picture.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it's I love that you bring it back to attachment, right? Because is expect the best, attach to none of it. If you don't get the result that you want, adopting that mindset is this or something better, right?
Mm.
Like, if there's something that I don't have, and this is something actually even this morning,
Yeah.
I really came to reflect on. It's like, wherever I am or am not in my business or whatever things I don't have, like if like the partnership that I'm looking for, like if I don't have it right now, it's because it's right now it's not, I don't have the capacity to hold the space for everything that I want. And so if I was given that, would I even be able to manage it and like take use of it? So being really present with the phase of life I'm in. One of the mentors that I listen to will be like, date the phase that you're in. Like, just be so utterly in love with your life right now, and just train yourself to see the best in all of it. And your circumstances will change, right? Like they can't help but like follow it. But we just have to stop having to control it and make it look a certain way, because if we expect it to have to look a certain way and then we'll be happy, that's when we get there and we're like, well, why am I still not happy? Right? Like, and all of it feels like it's built on the glass of cards or house of cards. I don't know what a glass of cards would be, but there we go. We're both making up phrases and words here now.
It'd just be like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like that's kind of when the healthy detachment, we can call upon that when we're dating this phase that we're in, so to speak, where, yeah, maybe we want to marry our life at some point, but it's like being okay with what we have right now. Like, one, just being able to participate in the present moment. But two, I think what I'm learning right now is I'm almost learning to embrace fear, because I feel like the stuff I've been avoiding or the stuff that I'm scared of, kind of, to put it in your words, like learning how to not allow it to restrict me anymore, but kind of, how can I turn this thing that I'm avoiding, or how can I turn this thing that's painful or that I'm scared of, how can I make this expand me? Because it's like, yeah, maybe I have a vision for what I truly want down the road, but maybe the thing that I'm avoiding right now has some secrets in it that I need to unpack this. And then whatever I learn from slaying this dragon, I can use to actually get me to that end goal. So it's kind of like embracing everything, and how it's sometimes maybe not the comfortable thing. But I'm also learning that is a whole new layer to self-love that I'm experiencing right now, where it's like sometimes doing the stuff that I really don't want to do, or that is scary, or again, that I've been avoiding. It's like I'm learning how to make those things like self-love activities, because I ultimately don't want that junk like clogging up my life. Like I don't want to give that stuff power anymore. So I'm just like laying it out on the table and starting to pick it apart because I want to take back my power over whatever it might be, if that makes sense. So I don't know where that came from, but it felt like it kind of cooked up from what you were saying a second ago, just like with that manifesting aspect and how it's so much more than just like, hey, this is what I want. I'm gonna like just wish for it to happen. It's like, no, how can I really connect and work with my body and these emotions to like align with what is really meant for me, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such beautiful awareness. Like our triggers are gifts, right? The things that we most want to avoid, that's really nature's sign of being like, hey, you need to do some exploration there because something there for you is feeling like it's broken or it's feeling off. And that's where, again, that language that we use is so important. Like, money is a big one for people, right? Like, you don't want to like deal with your financial situation, so I'm just going to avoid it. I'm not going to look at it. And does what we avoid get better? Not usually, right? Like we just create a bigger monster in the closet. But the more that we can start just playing with those things, it's like, why do I feel that way here? And then like, is that really true? And letting our emotions teach us and guide us. Then like by the time we get to like where the vision is and we have this like big vivid goal or whatever else, we might find that life had something completely different in store for us, but that really fulfilled every one of our dreams and wishes, right? Like it just becomes this really fun game to play
Yeah.
once you allow it to become fun. Right? Like in that language, to go back to the money thing, right? Like, I know you've seen this, but like anybody listening or watching right now, like just take I can't afford it out of your vocabulary and start asking how can I afford it, right? Like just create that expansion and stop using it as a weapon to shame yourself or to limit your possibilities, and just start talking from these things where like you get to be like, well, what do I actually really want to pursue? Like what lights me up? And the way we get there is by exploring the things that scare us and that freak us out, because I live by the idea that like pretty much all fear is false fear. Because I'm never really fearing what's going to happen. I'm fearing how I'm going to feel what's going to happen. If I'm always in charge of my feelings, if I always get to come back and choose love and joy and peace, then what is there to actually fear? There's no result that can really take that away from me. But it's taken a lot of work to get there. So I know that somebody might listen to that and be like, what does that even mean? I'm like, I promise you, like, this is possible for anybody to get to. But like, it's just, for the most part, we have so much more power and control to shape our experience just in the way that we speak it and that we name it. And being willing to dive into the depths and explore how we feel will solve pretty much any issue that we kind of have, right?
Yeah.
Like it certainly will change your relationship with alcohol or with drugs or with money or with shopping or whatever else. Like, because if we're just doing that to avoid feeling something, then I encourage anybody to go and be willing to have a little bit more exploration into what the feeling is.
Yeah. Well said. Absolutely. And I feel like that's kind of when connection, like when that fear is coming up, a lot of times I think connection to others can be such a great antidote to challenging that fear, because like you were saying, sometimes it's something that we put in the closet and we avoid it, and therefore it kind of has this life of its own. But sometimes just allowing someone else to touch the doorknob with us and open that closet, we're like, there's a monster in there. Like, Jason, do not open that. There's a monster. But then you're like, Savannah, it's a mouse. It's like that can be so helpful, I think, in really challenging that fear and, again, like the power it has over us. I know, like with finances specifically, like I'm working with one of my like dear best friends, been my best friend since like first grade. And he's my financial advisor now, Noah. So Noah, if you're watching this, I love you.
What's up,
But
Noah?
yeah, but like he's been so great because I came to him with some stuff that I was needing to kind of get organized and work through, and I was like crying and just so full of shame and just just distraught. But I just didn't want to avoid it anymore. So I was like, hey, this is what's going on. And he was so compassionate and was just allowing me to really break down that fear and be like, first, everything's going to be fine. And just like, and it was really breaking it down in steps. And I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I reached out for help, because it's really not that bad. Like, but if I just let it stay in that closet, it could have really turned into a monster. But it's so nice to be able to have that support. And I feel like that's really a lot of the value that I think coaching is getting a lot of traction for, where it's like how it's just kind of different from traditional therapy, where there is so much richness and value in traditional therapy. But I feel like coaches, we kind of have this special advantage to explore just these different avenues of behavior or how people operate, and how, like, yes, maybe it's like to accomplish a certain goal, but it's almost more like designing one's life, that I feel like is kind of the ultimate goal. It's like designing a life that truly makes us happy, so to speak. I feel like that's kind of where you and I come in, and how we ourselves like are so involved in this process. It's not just something that we're like, okay, you should do this. It's like, no, like, look, dude, I freaking get it. Like, this is hard. And I think that's something that, like, I just really cherish about like our friendship, is like how I can, munch on muffins and just talk to you about whatever crap is going on. And you're just like, yes, this is a beautiful journey. And I'm like, thank you. Um, so I appreciate just the collaboration. And I think, like, I mean, they say it takes a village, but I think honestly, just being able to, if you can work through the fear of asking for support, all those other fears that might be present, like, you don't have to tackle that by
Yeah.
yourself either.
Yeah, we're all naturally just afraid of being judged, right? Like it's one of those things that we all struggle with. And the nature of reality is we are going to be judged. Like, and we also judge others, right? Like we are meaning making machines. So to ask other people not to judge us is not really a realistic ask. But we do get to understand that some people are going to love us and some people are going to hate us. And being okay with that and being like, hey, you know what? Not everybody is going to be like my person, but the people who are my people and who are there, like they're going to come and help me and support me and be willing to walk with me. And it becomes this really beautiful thing, right? Because like, I will tell people all the time that to change your behavior or to change your authentic expression in hopes of being accepted by somebody else, like to hide away from somebody or to believe that you can't show a part of who you are, that's not an act of love, right? Like that is an act of manipulation. So even if you were to win that person's attention or affection or whatever else, then you're not really showing up as yourself. And so it's just this thing where it's like deception. So being willing just to be like, hey, I really need some help right now. And a lot of, and you know this from your work as well, is like the thing that people usually come to a coach for is never really the thing that they want to work on or they need to work on, right? Like it might be like, oh, there's a specific result, but it's really just an exploration into yourself. And your therapy has been tremendously beneficial in my life, and I certainly believe that it's very useful for a lot of people. But I like to say like therapy is past and present focused, and coaching gets to be present and future focused, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
get knowing your past and why you've kind of made some of the choices that you've made and the decisions you made can be very illuminating. But a lot of times we spend too much energy trying to understand it, and if we keep going back to it, again, we're just training our body like it's reliving it as the present moment.
Yeah.
Really starting to be like, I'll put it like I didn't think that, and I've still hesitated to step into this. Like for me, like really, if I were to rebrand myself right now, and who knows, maybe this would be, it'd be a consciousness coach, right? Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
raising people's consciousness and awareness. Like
Yeah.
once you start understanding that you're the creator of your experience, you're the storyteller of your life, getting somebody to help you write the story that you want to live by is freaking fun. And years ago, like we may have met, and maybe we would have like I'm sure we would have bonded, and maybe there would have been something where else. But like, would the relationship have been as loving and nourishing and and spiritual and just healing as it's been since we are just here able and we are able just to be like, hey, this is who I am, what I'm dealing with, and this is where I want to go. And do you want to come along on this ride with me? It's so fun. And yeah, that's worth investing into. That it really is like whoever is watching, and maybe if they question whether or not it's something to like invest in yourself, like it's the best investment you can make. It's going to be way better than putting something on outside of yourself to think that that's going to bring you joy and happiness. Like it's the inner work that really is worth all of it.
Mm. Yes, that's what it really boils down to. I feel like is that inner work, and I think just being able to like give yourself a chance to do that inner work as well. Like I feel like that's something that can be, whether it's scary or trigger, whatever, whatever comes up for whomever, like that inner work, it's, I always say it never fails you. It doesn't mean it's not gonna be hard. Like, oh my gosh, like the inner work that I'm doing right now, I'm like, bleh, like I don't like it, but it's so good and it's so fruitful, and it can be built upon so much as well, just because it's, again, it's like that true liberation, like really giving ourselves permission to thrive, and just kind of almost taking an inventory of what might be getting in the way of thriving. And I feel like that's where your book really comes into. I think it's such a great way for people to start exploring and doing some inner work, and then if they feel called to take that a step further and work with you one on one, like what a great foundation your book offers them to just start asking questions. And I mean, gosh, what is it? There's like an expression that's like, what is it, like dangerous questions? I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's like something along the lines of like the dangerous questions are the ones that are like the most like worth asking, something like that, something wise. You probably look it up on Google, but that's what I feel like your book really does, where it's like it takes questions, but it uses or allows people to use them in a way that it it gently shatters. It's kind of an oxymoron, but it's like it gently shatters the stuff that just isn't serving them anymore. And I use the word gentle just because it's with a loving intention behind it. It's like because it wants to kind of take this stuff down. It wants to shed this stuff. It wants to maybe crack some of these things open, but it's essentially coming from that place of like you want to have people learn how to hold themselves in this process, and that's ultimately a gentle thing. So I appreciate what you've put out in the world, and just being willing to one, take the time to make something so beautiful and thoughtful and potent, but also just, again, like the sharing of yourself in the process. And it was just fun reading your book too, because I'm like, oh, that's my friend Jason talking. Like I just feel your essence in it, and it was just so enjoyable to like hear your voice behind it. It wasn't like um it felt so authentic, like line by line. So just well done.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really, it means the world to me. It means the world to me that you would spend the time to read it and to bring me on today. Yeah, like another way of that questions things like the quality of your life improves, just the quality of the questions you ask yourself does, right? Like,
Yeah.
and for the book, I really just, it was my own lesson in courage and putting myself out there and getting my actions in line with where my heart and everything else are going. And I wanted that to be something where, as you know, it's by donation. So anybody who wants to check into it, it's a free resource. Like if somebody feels called to donate after it or during it, fantastic. I appreciate it. But it's meant to be there as just a tool that has helped me. Like gratitude journaling is literally the easiest, like freest like tool that you can do, right? It just requires a pen and a piece of paper, and being willing to do it. And so it just fascinated me why so many people have struggled with it. And part of that is because we don't often value what we don't pay for. Like, right? We don't think it can be that easy. We like to overcomplicate it. But this was my heart on a page, and this was me being more willing to put my voice and my heart out there, because that's where I feel called, that I'm being led. But I don't know what the results of it are going to be. I just know that I'm, letting it guide me down the path, and that I'm grateful for all of it. So, and I am just, for those of you guys who, well, nobody knows like how I am. So like whenever Savannah and I get together, it's always a gratitude and love fest, because like she's just such a special person. And I am an not even over communicator. I choose to communicate love openly and freely, because it is something that is so valuable to me, and I want people to really feel and know that they're appreciated. And I could not be more grateful to know you, and to be on this journey, and to have you as somebody that I get to lean on and learn from, and that we get to create such magical things separately and together. You're the best. So thank you for being so generous with your spirit and your heart and your time, because I do receive the pouring of love that is.
Likewise, you're right. It is a little like just gratitude love fest. It's so great to just be so aligned on so many different things. Like I feel like every time I walk away from our conversation, my cup just feels full. I feel like I have so much to noodle on and think about and learn from, as well as like just a deep sense of belonging and validation when it comes down to some of these things that I might think I'm like off the wall about. You're like taking it right out of my mouth and saying it, and I'm like, oh wow, this is great. So thank you for your time, and just for being willing to be my first guest, and for sharing so much of yourself, and being such a huge support on my journey just ever since we first got pizza that one time. So it's definitely blossomed from there. And I just really appreciate you. And those of y'all who would like to connect with Jason, it's outoftheweedscoaching.com, right?
Outoftheweedscoaching.com. As I've said, I have some work to do to get that up to kind of my current mission. That the website is a little bit outdated, but that's definitely the place to go and reach me. And then I think you're gonna have there's a Facebook group that I do for free, the Out of the Weeds Kindness Community. Anybody who's there,
I didn't know about that.
No, I haven't mentioned that one. I've got a couple things that we need to talk about offline for some news stuff. But the book's available for anyone. I think that you said you'd have the link for that in the show notes, something like that. But anyone can reach out. I'm happy to provide it. I'm happy just to kind of do just every person that I work with. Like there's always just a free call to just chat and connect and see what you're struggling with. Like if I can help somebody in a 15-20 minute conversation create a new path forward, I'm happy to do that. Like I just am here to serve. And so anybody, if you feel called to connect, I would love to meet you. I would love to connect with you, and I would love to support you.
Yes. Well, what a beautiful resource you are, Jason. And just thank you for existing and for all that you do. And so those of y'all who want to check out Jason and his book, I'm going to put all those links in the description for you, so you can connect with him. And you can also find him on Instagram as well. So definitely such a beautiful human being. I'm so glad and grateful you're in my corner, and thank you again for taking time, and thank you to all who've tuned in, listening, watching. Please share this with those that you think would benefit just from hearing our chat today, and please share any feedback you have for us, and looking forward to connecting with you all again soon. And thank you again, Jason. You're the best.
Thank you so much. And anybody who's made it to this point, thank you for investing the time in this, because that is a gift to us as well. So thank you very much for spending your resources with us. I hope it's been a valuable use of your time. And Savannah, I just can't wait to see where this grows from here for you and for us. So we will talk soon. I appreciate and love all of y'all.
Thank you so much.